At first glance, Kaido may seem to be a typical muscle-headed, power-hungry villain with shallow ambition, and admittedly it has taken much longer than usual for Oda to begin pulling back the curtain to grant readers deeper insight into Kaido's character. That may soon change, but I believe there's enough information already present in the narrative to begin piecing together a pretty clear picture of Kaido's character, and his relationship with Yamato is likely the key. From the moment Yamato was introduced into the narrative by name in chapter 979 and on panel in chapter 983, her contentious relationship with her father has been a focal point. Both Kaido and Yamato discussed this strained relationship with other characters, but it reached a boiling point in chapter 1015 when Yamato at last confronted Kaido on the roof of Onigashima. In chapter 1024, Kaido confirmed that during their battles, he has always been trying to kill Yamato, specifically because she wants to live as Oden. What's interesting is Kaido's stated reasoning. He makes it clear that this is not a family squabble, meaning it's not personal, which is certainly a strange sentiment when talking about a father and his daughter. This rationale reveals the incredible consistency of Kaido's warrior principles, regardless of any personal relationship he might have with his opponent. He told Yamato that if she wants to call herself Oden, she needs to be prepared for war, because this isn't a game. As far as we know, Kaido is ultimately looking for a place to die, a brilliant death to capstone his life as a warrior. Presumably, this desire is what motivates his attempts to initiate a global war, with his occupation of Wano serving as a means to that end. But he becomes incredibly serious in combat, and despite the fact that he enjoys challenge, tells Yamato it's not a game, that combat must be taken seriously, and that there are real stakes involved. Yamato and Kaido obviously don't see eye to eye when it comes to Kozuki Oden. Yamato believes Kaido is refusing her right to love and admire Oden, but from Kaido's perspective, Yamato taking on Oden's mantle is a declaration of war. Oden was a warrior, and declaring his name isn't something to take lightly. It's not a game of make-believe. Assuming the role of Oden means Yamato must be prepared to embody her hero in every sense, even to the point of death. Yamato needs to die to be like Oden, because to Kaido, Oden is not a representation of freedom. Oden was a great warrior, but he also failed to best Kaido. Kaido told Zoro that wounding him and leaving a scar should be taken as a badge of honor. In that sense, he respected Oden as a warrior because he was the one who left the 2 scars on Kaido's abdomen, but Oden's failure to strike down Kaido forever marks him as a failed warrior in Kaido's eyes. Kaido was looking for someone to best him in combat and take his life. He doesn't admire Oden's principles or strength because of this critical failing. Oden was unable to strike down Kaido, and thus in Kaido's eyes, his life ended in failure. Kaido seems to have no other framework for valuing individuals beyond strength, and because he's regarded as the strongest living creature, no one else quite measures up. Kaido's harsh demand that Yamato lay down her life for claiming the name Oden transitioned the narrative from their present battle to a flashback set 20 years earlier in which we saw the same debate unfold. An 8-year-old Yamato was chained to a pillar while Kaido stood over her and demanded she must die if she wants to be Oden. We learned several important details through this scene. First, that Yamato was assigned the epitaph Ogre Princess or Oni Princess at a young age, which is interesting when we consider the fact that she was already being referred to as Kaido's son at that point in time. In the present, Kaido's underlings all refer to Yamato as Kaido's son rather than his daughter, but the reason hasn't been made entirely clear. Yamato's claim to be Kozuki Oden was a potential explanation, but didn't really seem to fit with the fact that Kaido doesn't respect anything else about Yamato's wishes. He's clearly intent on installing her as figurehead shogun of New Onigashima despite her protest to the contrary, refuses to call her Kozuki Oden, and shackled her wrists with explosives to prevent her from setting out to sea. It previously seemed possible that Kaido was forcibly raising Yamato as a man, but that now seems to clash with this new piece of information. That Yamato was simultaneously referred to as Kaido's son and Ogre Princess indicates that this nomenclature is not directly related to gender. Kaido referring to Yamato as his son rather than his daughter may be more related to a particular set of responsibilities expected of a male heir as opposed to a female heir in the culture from which Kaido originates being foisted upon Yamato. Perhaps it has more to do with the succession of power and authority than anything else. My best guess is that leadership either in Wano or in Kaido's place of origin is exclusively patriarchal. Yamato is Kaido's only child and thus is expected to play the role of Kaido's son. So the title son in this case is a representation of a set of expectations or responsibilities. There's no denial of the reality that Yamato is his daughter, hence the epitaph Ogre Princess, but being Kaido's only child, she's nevertheless intended to step into the role of Kaido's son. It's also interesting to note that Kaido now demands Yamato become shogun of New Onigashima based on her mythical devil fruit. Just like Luffy, Yamato accidentally ate her devil fruit because she was hungry, but Kaido says he went to great lengths to acquire it and never intended it be given to Yamato. So who was the mythical Okuchi no Makami devil fruit intended for, if not his daughter Yamato? Kaido couldn't have desired the devil fruit for himself, given he acquired the mythical fish fruit 38 years ago on God Valley, and his commanders were all given ancient model zone powers. So does this suggest the burden Kaido now places on Yamato was birthed by this blunder, and that he previously intended to assign this position to someone else, perhaps someone to whom we have not yet been introduced? I'm discussing this topic because it demonstrates not only the volatility of Kaido and Yamato's relationship, emphasized by his harsh demand that she lay down her life for claiming the name Oden, but also the rigidity of his principles and ideology in all aspects of his life. Yamato cannot simply be a daughter with the role and responsibility of a son. She must be called son in order to fulfill the purpose Kaido intends for her, and she has absolutely no say in the matter. I suppose you could say to an extent Yamato demonstrates the same rigid or formal reasoning as does her father, though obviously she exhibits much better moral standards and more noble goals. Yamato wants to be free like Oden, so she must be Oden. Oden was a man, so she must be a man. Oden is dead, so in Kaido's eyes, if Yamato wants to be Oden,
literally,
she must also be dead.
Literally.
If Yamato is going to take on the role and position of his son, she must be his son. The Oni are apparently a very literal people.
His people are completely literal. Metaphors are gonna go over his head.
Or at least they seem to heavily emphasize the importance of titles and names in defining who a person is, their intended role and purpose, and the values they stand for and support. When the brief flashback scene returned to the present, Yamato asks Kaido why he steals her freedom and keeps the people of Wano enslaved. I was actually very surprised by Kaido's response. He said life isn't a series of simple questions with simple answers, which implies a surprising amount of intellectual depth for a character whose explicit motivation is fairly straightforward. But this cryptic response also begs further inquiry. The first notable point here is that as far as we're aware, Kaido's motivation is entirely self-serving. He's using Wano's natural borders to shield him from the world as he amasses an army in hopes of someday initiating a global war, which will help him achieve the brilliant warrior's death he so desperately craves. But does this line of dialogue suggest even deeper motivation? The sentiment expressed by Kaido in the scene implies a degree of moral complexity not yet fully reflected in his stated goals. Indeed, we have reason to believe there are more layers to Kaido despite his brutal and totalitarian reign of Wano, and his callous indifference to the suffering incurred by his occupation. For one, Kaido showed a surprising amount of concern for Jack after he was injured by Inurushi and Nekomamushi during the rooftop battle, which indicates he has more respect for his subordinates than is typical for villains of this type. Importantly, he emphasized Jack's strength and remaining utility as a warrior, so I wouldn't go so far as to call this real friendship or representative of genuine affection. Yet Kaido's meeting with King on Punk Hazard, shown in a brief flashback scene from chapter 1035, also echoed this same sentiment. Kaido asked King his name, which we learned to be Albert. However, Kaido decided not to call him Al, and instead gave him the name King as a signifier of his strength. As we have seen, Kaido is surprisingly loyal to those who submit to his leadership and also values his subordinates, though again he emphasized King or Albert's strength, further illustrating the primary basis of his value structure. On a side note, I wonder if Queen was also recruited from Punk Hazard given his prior association with Dr. Vegapunk. This could explain the animosity between King and Queen, given the latter would have participated in the experiments conducted on the former. Of course, we don't need an explicit explanation for their rivalry, as we have seen the Zoro-Sanji dynamic at play in many other crews throughout the series. It's also interesting to note Kaido's willingness to forgive and forget, so to speak. With few exceptions, anyone who bends the knee is free to join his crew, regardless of how desperately they may have fought against Kaido in the past or sought to end his life.
When you bend the knee.
Those Kaido has intentionally killed without chance of reprieve seem to be the exceptions rather than the rule. He prefers to break the will or spirit of those who defy him. As long as they can accept his worldview, that the strong lead and the weak follow, they're welcome among the Beast Pirates. He famously executed Kozuki Oden during the Hour of Legends, despite respecting Oden as a great warrior. He never offered Oden the opportunity to submit, but given the strength of Oden's resolve and his conqueror's haki, Kaido likely knew there was no chance Oden would willingly serve him and join the Beast Pirates. Nevertheless, Kaido prides himself on his ability to break the resolve or will of other warriors, including those like Luffy and Kid who possess Conqueror's Haki. The fact that he didn't even try to break Oden's will could indicate he recognized Oden's will was unshakable, or it could represent the significance of ruling Wano unchallenged to his ultimate ambition. It seems there are specific parameters which guide Kaido's decision to deal out death and judgment to his adversaries. He executed Higurushi for her deceptive tactics, which ultimately deprived Kaido of a warrior's death at the hands of Kozuki Oden. Kurozumi Orochi is similarly duplicitous and notoriously changed the terms of his agreement with Oden in the boiling pot by rescinding his offer to commute Oden's sentence if he survived a full hour in the oil. Kaido didn't stop Orochi at the time, but he certainly didn't hesitate to later betray Orochi when his usefulness expired and the new Onigashima project was announced. We know Kaido always fights with killing intent, even against his own daughter, but outside of battle, he has only intentionally ended the lives of Kozuki Oden, a warrior too noble and proud to ever bend to Kaido's authority, and Orochi and Higurushi, both duplicitous snakes from the Kurozumi clan. Interestingly, the surviving members of the Kozuki clan are the only ones we have seen Kaido directly pursue with killing intent outside of battle, which likely speaks to the significance of his desire to maintain ownership of Wano. Kaido told Yamato that Wano is special and critical to his goals. Both Oden and Momonosuke challenge his rulership, and thus he's willing to execute them because he views doing so as somehow necessary. Kaido isn't expressly pursuing a path of death and destruction for its own sake. He has executed those who fight dishonorably using deceptive tactics, and is generally willing to allow those who surrender to live, but he gave no quarter to the members of the Kozuki clan, including Oden's defenseless children. He has particularly set his sights on executing Momonosuke at all costs, even outside of combat. Importantly, from his perspective, these decisions do not violate Kaido's personal warrior's code. As we will discuss in greater depth in a few moments, Kaido's rigid adherence to his warrior principles is one of his defining characteristics. His willingness to execute a child to maintain his rank and position, and to break the resolve of the people of Wano to maintain his hold over the land of samurai seems to be a significant deviation. This suggests that he potentially views Momo as fair game despite his age, because of either Momo's position as the nation's would-be leader, or because of whatever intrinsic quality makes his survival an imperative. The other possibility is that ruling Wano is so important to Kaido, he's willing to betray even his own principles to do so. Life isn't a series of simple questions with simple answers. Kaido is willing to strike down anyone in combat, but if they survive, he allows them to live as long as it takes for their will to be broken and for them to submit to his leadership. Again, I wouldn't say this means Kaido genuinely cares about the well-being of others, but it implies his value structure is entirely centered on strength. If a warrior acknowledges their inferiority and submits, they're free to join the Beast Pirates, even if they consider Kaido to be their enemy. At least outwardly, Kaido doesn't seem to particularly care if people hate him, including his subjects, his subordinates, and even his own child, as long as they submit to his leadership on the basis of his being the more powerful warrior. His words to Yamato imply he regards this as justifiable, which doesn't mean Kaido's values are correct, but does imply he views his actions as somehow necessary and beneficial to others or the larger world, rather than just himself. Kaido wants to start a global war, which, in keeping with his stated values, means creating a world where survival of the fittest becomes the governing principle. Kaido doesn't necessarily view the wake of death and destruction his actions would precipitate as detrimental, because he places greater value on those who would possess the strength to survive. In Kaido's eyes, war is a necessary catalyst for the strong to deservedly live and the weak to deservedly die. The very first words which appear in the narration boxes accompanying Kaido's introduction in chapter 795 read, "The strong live and the weak die. That is the only rule of this world." These are the first words Oda chose to associate with Kaido, and thus they likely fundamentally inform his worldview. But how did Kaido arrive at this conclusion? Where did this ideology originate? It's important to remember Kaido is aware of elements of the world's history which aren't necessarily common knowledge. Joy Boy, the three ancient weapons, the road poneglyphs, and whatever quality makes Wano so unique and important to the One Piece world. Understanding how Kaido thinks, what he wants to accomplish, and why is likely connected to understanding how he acquired such arcane knowledge of the One Piece world. Kaido told King he's the only one who can change the world, which fits with what we know about other pirates vying for the title of Pirate King, all of whom want to reshape the world in some fashion, and that likely reflects Joy Boy's incomplete quest. It's for this reason King is convinced Kaido represents Joy Boy's return. In chapter 1025, Kaido became increasingly unhinged as he wore down Yamato's defenses, and eventually knocked her to the ground, granting us what appears to be the deepest insight into Kaido's character to date. He told Yamato that friendship is a sham, and that deep down, even those who claim to care about you are afraid. He told Yamato that she is the child of ogres, and thus must rule others with strength, that she is not meant to be friends with humans. We already know Kaido distrusts pirate alliances, but we further learned in this scene that he disbelieves in the very notion of friendship. Rocks may explain this in part, but I have a feeling Kaido's inability to trust others runs even deeper. And at this point, I just want to know who hurt Kaido to make him this way. To me, Kaido's words in this chapter scream projection. He's projecting his own fears and insecurities onto Yamato. He chastised Yamato for being alone when he was the very person responsible for keeping her isolated on Onigashima. In a sense, his treatment of Yamato represents a self-fulfilling prophecy. He doesn't allow anyone to show Yamato kindness and keeps her isolated on Onigashima because her forming genuine friendships with others would challenge his existing worldview. He has been so hurt by his past that he now fully believes such bonds are impossible for ogres like himself, and thus will subconsciously destroy any evidence to the contrary. Yamato is like him, and her experiences must be the same as his. When he told Yamato that her fate is to rule others by strength, his face was contorted into a monstrous, demonic form. This was the most intimidating Kaido has been so far, suggesting deep-rooted emotions were bubbling to the surface. This evidences the fact that Kaido's words in this chapter were very deeply personal, and are likely rooted in his yet-to-be-revealed backstory. He earlier told the Scabbards that the Straw Hat Pirates would inevitably turn on them, because pirate alliances always end in failure. We know the members of the Rock's Pirates share no genuine fellowship, and his relationship with Lin is often outwardly hostile, so his attitude toward other pirates comes as no surprise. But here he told Yamato that her being hated is inevitable because of what she is on a fundamental level. Assuming these words are reflective of Kaido's own experiences, we can surmise quite a bit about his backstory. It isn't completely confirmed in this conversation, but Kaido seems to indicate he and Yamato are not human, and instead belong to a race of Oni or Ogres, which honestly makes a lot of sense and also makes them far more interesting characters. He told Yamato that it is her fate to be hated by others because she's an ogre, which suggests his present pessimistic outlook on friendship and camaraderie has been shaped by his own experiences as an ogre. In fact, it seems Kaido has committed himself to the warrior's path, in part because he considers it futile to resist this fate. He told Yamato that no matter what she does, the samurai will never accept her as one of them. In his experiences, deep down, those who claimed to be his friends in truth feared him and perhaps exploited his strength. Importantly, he directly related this perspective to being an ogre. So what does this tell us about Kaido's past? Essentially, there is a societal perception of ogres, which Kaido has committed to upholding because he believes people will inevitably view him through that lens. In a sense, Kaido believes society will consider him a monster no matter what he does, so why pretend otherwise? This characterization fits well with the kabuki theater motif consistently used throughout the Wano story arc. Yamato has cast herself in the role of Kozuki Oden, and is attempting to play the part of her hero in real life, at least until she inevitably passes on that mantle to Momonosuke, Oden's son and true heir. In similar fashion, Kaido has resigned himself to play the part of monstrous ogre cast for him by society. Somebody once told him the world would always view him a certain way. He set out to sea, maybe with a group of friends, maybe in pursuit of impossible dreams, maybe like Big Mom, he once held more noble aspirations. But the years started coming and they never stopped coming, and eventually it didn't make sense for him to live for fun. So now he tries very hard to fit the mold created for him based on the fact that he's an ogre, because only shooting stars break the mold. And in case I'm being too subtle with this reference, yes, Kaido is Shrek. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please leave a like. If you want to be notified when future videos, including the next part of this video series, are released, please consider subscribing and remember to hit the bell icon to turn on notifications. It really helps this channel grow and I really appreciate your support. But most important, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you let me know your thoughts down in the comments.